All right, good evening. And calling to order the regular meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education on Monday, December 16th, 2024. If we can all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, we're going to review and approve the agenda for December 16th. Can I please get a motion? Erica, second. Matt Wexler, all in favor? Great, thank you. And then we're going to approve two sets of minutes. One for December 2nd, 2024. Can I get a motion? Penny, second. Phil, all in favor? Thank you. And then can I get a motion to approve the minutes for the budget workshop on December 9th, 2024? Laura, Phil, second, all in favor? Great, thank you very much. Moving on to comments from the public. To ensure that the public's right to be heard, the board set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes to be allotted to each speaker with a maximum of 15 on each subject. Would anybody like to approach the board?
Good evening. I have two things to report tonight: a surprising Elm Street conversation and a possible win-win to the Alexei book controversy. It was a strange feeling to be speaking at Board of Ed meetings and receiving no response. It felt like I was speaking to a wall. That was until Friday, when I was shopping on Elm Street. As I was making my purchase, a woman came up to me and asked if I was Mary Ann Canaan, who spoke at the Board of Ed meeting. She had seen me on TV. She wanted to thank me and told me that she agrees with everything I have said. As she was speaking, another woman came up to thank the first woman for speaking to me because she too wanted to thank me. Then a sales girl chimed in. This is why my mother decided not to send my younger sister to public schools. In fact, in college, I am assigned a reading that I don't think I should be reading either. I didn't make this up. This just happened. I am not talking to a wall. 2, the win-win. Sherman Alexie has a website where he welcomes comments. I have written to him and asked him to consider with his publisher putting out a new edition of the Diary of a Part-Time Indian, preserving his very inspiring breakthrough story and eliminating the vulgar and offensive parts. This way, schools could choose which version is appropriate and meets their standards of decency. And he will sell many more books. We'll see if he responds. Meanwhile, I understand that a committee of supervisors and teachers are meeting to review the curriculum 9 through 12, and that a workshop is to be held in January or February when parents can review the committee's findings and discuss the books to be used in the future. I will look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to approach the board?
Good evening, Board of Ed. My speech is not as positive as Ms. Knag's. My name is Julia Farber of Sagamore Trail. I'm here to formally submit an official request for review regarding several critical issues related to district's compliance with Connecticut state law. 1, absence of curriculum committee. Despite my formal request on November 18, no action has been taken. 2, opt-out policy. November 4th, Elena Colarusso formally requested an opt-out policy for a book containing explicit language and racial comments. This request has not been addressed, which violates Connecticut General Statute 10-4A, mandating the creation of a safe and supporting learning environment. 3, lack of parental involvement. Parents have been excluded from the curriculum committee and the school security and safety committee, violating multiple state laws. 4, non-compliance with textbook laws. Connecticut General Statute 10-229 requires a 2/3 vote with appropriate notice before textbooks can be changed. This process has not been followed, which compromises the transparency and legality of textbook changes. 5, Failure to present the profile report. Connecticut General Statutes 10-220C mandates the presentation of profile report to the public after November 1st, but it has not occurred, which undermines public trust in the district operation. Finally, I would like to point out that the current school budget allocates $1.8 million for curriculum development and $345,000 for legal matters. Given the issues outlined above, I would like to ask the following. What are we paying for? What is the role of the legal counsel? How long has the district been out of compliance with Connecticut state law? Please consider this my official request for review. I will follow up with supporting documentation via email and expect comprehensive response. We parents request a detailed presentation of findings and proposed corrective actions at March 3rd, 2025 public meeting. Should no action be taken, I will escalate these concerns to the State Board of Education. Thank you, and I wish you and your families a joyful holiday season.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to approach the board?
Good evening. My name is Mary Sue Rucci, 181 South Avenue. I was raised in New Canaan, kindergarten through college, and through high school, graduated New Canaan High School. I received a top-rate education, and I wasn't going to speak tonight, but given the negativity there, I wanted to speak to say thank you, because I trust New Canaan schools. We are #1 in the state. We are one of the top public school districts in the nation. We have done extraordinary work. You all have done extraordinary work. Thank you, Dr. Letzi, and all of your teachers. I think that what is happening now is a bit of a Trojan horse with this book and these complaints, and we do have a curriculum council that is comprised of educators from the district that adhere to the strongest standards nationwide. The book in question was a National Book Award winner. I also want to mention I'm a book editor and a publisher because of my incredible education here in New Canaan. And I am so dismayed to see that we are thinking about taking a minority group of parents who are objecting to this, and they are telling us what my child can read and what our educators can do. And I just want to say, this book was also named an award winner by the American Library Association for literature for young readers. It's been nominated for awards in 20 states. When I think about educators overseeing the curriculum, I'm all for it. When I think about parents, you're telling me that a minority of parents, their opinions are more important than the education that's been laid out by the New Canaan public school system, and I don't think that's right. 85% of the graduating class last year got into one of their top 3 colleges. I can't think of another district that can say something like that. So I just want to say thank you. And I strongly disagree with what has been happening here, and you'll be hearing more from me. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to reports and recognition. Statement of accounts with Sean O'Keefe.
Thank you. Okay, 5 months in to the school year, as of November 30th, our operating fund expense actual is $37.2 million, or 34.1% of our full-year budget of $109 million. That compares to a prior year attainment of 33.8, so we're slightly higher, 0.3 percentage points, and it's primarily attributable to just some timing differences in the way we pay our bills from month to month. On grants, our grants awarded to date, $2,086,501. Against that, we've spent $308,000, and leaves a remaining balance for the rest of the year of $1.778 million. In school lunch, our school lunch revenue through November is $996,000, or 32.3% of our budget of $3,086,504, $3.1 million, and it represents a year-to-year decrease of about $38,000, or minus 3.7%. Expenses through November, $845,000, or 29.7% of our full-year budget, and a year-to-year decrease of about $6,000 or minus 0.7%. The decrease in expenses primarily attributable to lower groceries, paper goods, and outsourced services. And I also want to mention that in the salary line, there'll be a retroactive payment for the contract that the board approved last time. It'll be about a $10,000 retroactive pay, and that will be made at the end of December. Net income for food services is currently at $151,000, so we're still profitable. Facilities rental donations in summer school, facilities rentals revenue of about $60,000, expenses of $77,000. Income for year-to-date is minus $17,000, leaving a fund balance of $309,000. For donations, current year revenue of $41,000, expenses to date of about $77,000, net income through November minus $37,000. Fund balance remains strong at $142,000. And finally, summer school revenue, $124,000, expenses of $133,000, with a net income year-to-date of $8,800, and leaving a fund balance of $162,000. Questions?
Penny?
So in terms of our facilities rental, I'm trying to remember, do we typically run with our expenses higher than our revenues?
Typically, in the first half of the year, we have some expenses that bleed into the current year, whereas the revenue may have been incurred at the end of the year. We may have some expenses that bleed into the beginning of the next year, so we could have it. But on a full-year basis, no, it should be fine.
We'll even out,
Yeah,
okay.
oh, more than even out.
Okay,
And we
great.
do use those funds, Penny, to reinvest in the facility in different ways. So anything that's spent from that facilities usage fund goes back into the facility itself. So whether it's an auditorium or the dome or something else, that's a part of the rental package down the line. So it's depending upon if there's an expense in a given year, you'll see that dip. And it may dip more than the income in that given year, but it'll always run a positive balance.
Okay, no, I was just looking at it to try, because I know that the formula Brendan came up with that we've been using for
Correct.
a number of years relates to our expenses in terms of how we set the rates. I just wanted to make sure we were going to net out
Yeah.
positive by the end of the year.
Another example is the food services budget, where we typically will budget for equipment, and we may not, just due to timing, we may not incur that expense in that year. Happens the following year.
Okay.
So, but we'll still be using the funds that ended up in the fund balance.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
And the Resources Committee will be reviewing the building rental fund policy and, building rental policy and all, because we're going to be incorporating the dome into that in the future.
Right.
And so that'll be a chance for us to look at the rates also and make sure they're still competitive and meeting our needs.
That sounds terrific, thank you.
One last point is our external auditors, KF O'Connor Davies, completed their audit of fiscal 23-24 for both the town and the Board of Ed. Happy to report that there were no misstatements, no findings, and no recommendations.
That's great, thank you.
A clean audit.
I'd say so.
That's great.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Good, all right, thank you. Okay, we've got a number of action items this evening. First, a donation from NCCF for the Dome sound system.
Yep, I'm just, if we can change, the donation's actually coming from the New Canaan Public Schools Dome Fund. It's housed at the Community Foundation, but it's actually coming from the New Canaan Public Schools Dome Fund. I apologize for that. I can talk about it, or we can get a first, second, then I can talk about it, however you'd like to do it. I'll give you just a little bit of information, sure. Of course, this is possible thanks to the hard work and generosity of Sarah Schubert and everybody on the committee and all the community members that donated towards the dome itself as we were doing our renovation. So what we're looking to do is upgrade the sound system that's in the dome. So the original package of the sound system had stereo sound, which is good, But given the quality of the experience in that dome, and we've had some experts come through, and we've had our VPA director come through and some others, feel like it's a worthwhile investment to upgrade from that stereo sound to a surround sound system in there. So there were funds available in the Dome Fund that's housed by the Community Foundation. And I met with Sarah and we talked about this a bit. There's still a few more dollars there that she's going to be reinvesting with the Community Foundation as a way to build up some funds if there are future needs. But right now, this upgrade of the sound system, this is a $10,000 donation here. We'll look to cover the difference. We're looking at different prices now and getting bids, and try to get this done in the next couple of months if possible. So this comes from the money that was fundraised by the Dome Committee for the dome itself. So looking to just make that upgrade. Most of the electronics are the same. It's really speakers and their placement and what have you, some of the details. But we do think it'll make a significant difference there in the dome for the kids in the community.
When will this work be done?
We're collecting pricing now, so we hope that it would be done in the next couple of months.
Great. Any questions? Penny?
It's a fantastic upgrade, and I can't wait to hear it once it's in. I was just wondering, is there anything that we can do in the district or where we can donate the old sound system, or are we going to use those elements in the new sound system, or how? I was just curious because it's not that old. What can be done with that?
Oh, it's not old at all. That's a good question. I guess we'll know when we do the install, we'll certainly look to repurpose the speakers that are in there. I think the wiring will remain in part, and there'll be some new wiring that's run, but we'll reuse as much as we can in the new system, and anything that's not, we will definitely look to repurpose somewhere else.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
Any other questions? Okay, I'd like to move to approve a donation of $10,000 for the New Canaan Community Foundation through the New Canaan Public Schools Dome Fund to fund a new surround system for the dome. Can I get a motion? Matt Campbell, second Penny, all in favor? Motion accepted, thank you. All right. Next, we've got a number of second readings, and Dr. Letzi was able to provide us with a number of redlined versions of these last week at the budget workshop. So the first one, budget assumptions, related priorities, budget calendar for the second read. Any discussion or questions following up? Okay, then I guess we could just go right to a vote on that. All in favor? Okay, that passes. Next is the 2026-27 district calendar as a second read. Any comments, questions, concerns, thoughts on the school district calendar?
So just a quick piece of information for what it's worth. I did look back on the last time that the calendar broke this way, where Labor Day is on the 7th. And it was a very similar setup to the calendar. So that was back in 2015-16, and almost identical to what's being proposed here. The only difference was we had the professional learning day in April to start the April break instead of in February to start the February break. And in 15-16, it was a leap year, and it's not a leap year in 26-27. But otherwise, as far as the first day of school went and the breaks and other things, they were identical.
Okay, great. All in favor of passing the 2026-27 district calendar for second read? All right, thank you. Next, on to policy updates. The first one, move to approve as a second reading the revisions to the Board of Education Policy 5100, age of entrance and grade placement in the school system, as first moved and seconded by Mr. Hogan and Mrs. Schwedel, respectively. Comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a few comments here. In reading this, for the most part, it's fine, except for I have real issues with the principal being the final arbiter of what happens, of who decides what's best for the child. And I think just as a matter of principle, I think that that should default to the parents. And I think that it's obvious for several reasons, but when I think about the way that this policy is applied, It, again, I think that we give discretion to parents whose children are born in the first 8 months of the year as to when they wanted to start kindergarten. And the trend has been actually to hold them back for another year, right? And so why would we remove the discretion for parents just because your child is born in the last 4 months and not defer to them on what's best for their child? Especially, as I mentioned, the trend is actually to hold them back. So when you lay it all out, the chance of a parent wanting to accelerate, then having consulted with the school, going against that recommendation, we're probably not talking about very many, if any, children that would actually fall in that category. But yet the signaling that we're doing, I think, is, quite frankly, I'm just against it on principle. And I think that as you think about what the state has done, right, in laying this out, it baffles me that we, as New Canaan Board of Education, would go beyond the state in curtailing parents' rights. And that's exactly what we're doing. Like, we need to defer to the parents. And that's what I've heard that as I ran last year, that I've promised to do that. And this seems like a layup in doing that, because quite frankly, the downside is very little. But the signaling in that, the downside is little because I don't think many children will ultimately fall through and fall into this category. But the signaling of our willingness to give that power and that discretion to parents, not go beyond the state in curtailing their rights, I think is powerful. And, the argument is, well, the state will eventually do away with the waiver. Well, let the state do away with the waiver. I'm not going to be the one to front-run the state in curtailing parents' rights.
So I guess your recommendation, Matt, would be to this line here right above exception, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
So in the
5.
waiver, we have basically, upon reviewing the request, meeting, we have the principal as being, afterwards, the principal will determine whether to grant the override of the eligibility age criteria for the child. And I think making the principal a final arbiter when that's not required by law, I think that's a slap in the face to parents.
So I think it's above that, right? So after observation by the classroom teachers, guidance personnel, and the building principal, the final grade placement will be determined by the building principal. This one here. So that's different than that.
It's that very last paragraph, because
It's the last sentence.
it's the placement in kindergarten. In the legislation, it does require a meeting be held in the school and then an assessment to be given to the child. And that the decision's made based upon the results of whatever that assessment may be. And there's been quite a bit of conversation in the state about what tests should we give to a 4-year-old, perhaps 7 months before they're going to be enrolling, because these conversations have to happen now, because if they're not going to come into kindergarten, and if they're born in October, November, December, whatever, the placements for pre-K are happening now, right? So we did have so there's been some question about where does that assessment occur? What is that assessment and how do we do it? I will say the language has always had the discretion of the New Canaan Public Schools involved. Last year when we created this, it said at the discretion of the New Canaan Public Schools, and this time
But no,
it does as well. But the
explicitly
language
last year,
is,
I explicitly asked last year who would be the final arbiter and guarantee that it was the parents, and I want to preserve that as well.
Sure, sure.
And I think that whether the state, and you could make the same argument, Dr. Lutzy, about someone who is born in, that has an August 31st birthday, right? You would have to make that assessment now, right? And so but they have a September 15th birthday, right? So I think that, again, as a matter of principle, I'm all for the assessment. I think it's a benefit to the parents for the school to provide that assessment, make a recommendation, 100% in agreement. But again, the final arbiter of what's best for the child is the parent. That's my view.
So the recommendation is to effectively remove, just want to clarify, that we're just basically eliminate that last sentence.
Correct. Or, or explicitly, the as I mentioned, like the final arbiter would be the parent, not the principal. As long as that's permitted by state legislation, which for now it is.
Penny?
Well, I would just say that I think that as a New Canaan Public Schools, that we're responsible to make certain that the atmosphere in all of our classrooms is conducive to proper education and allowing all the students in the class to learn appropriately. And kindergarten is always a tricky one. You do have parents that hold children back, and you can actually end up with close to a 2-year, I don't know, I haven't done the math, sorry.
Yeah, no, you can.
Spread, which can be very difficult under our class guidelines, which are 16 to 20. I, for one, don't want to reopen the class guidelines and make those smaller, because I think that could have severe or big consequences. But if if we have classes where we have kids performing at such disparate levels, we're going to need to provide amazing support to those classrooms so that all of the students have the right atmosphere. And honestly, I mean, I had a disruptive kid. He ended up doing really well, but he was not always, ruly. And I sent him early. He was a November birthday. I sent him early. And over the years, when we went, I ended up holding him back. But I just think that we have to allow the educators to weigh in on what they want the classroom atmosphere to be, and to look out for all of the interests of all the students, all 16 to 20 students in each one of those classrooms. And I think that we're making this recommendation based upon the experience we've had in the kindergarten classrooms this year, where we basically gave the discretion to the parents and said, if you want your child to move forward, then we'll allow you to do it. And I mean, we could ask for a little bit more detail about what happened, but I think there were some negative consequences to that, and it made the learning atmosphere harder. And that as a result, we've determined, that professional educators have determined that you want to narrow that gap. We didn't want to close the door completely, so we said you need to have a compelling reason. But we wanted to narrow that gap in terms of what can happen. So I support the language. I actually would be open to one change, which is that in a lot of these rules, we allow the principal, and then there's a way to appeal. So I would say that somebody could appeal to the superintendent from the principal. We could write that language in, so that you just feel like there's a little bit of due process, and you get a second. If you're a parent who doesn't win with what you think is right, you get a second bite of the apple.
Well, and just for what
Sorry,
it's worth.
Brian, you might not want that, but.
Nope, I'll let you know.
Brendan's got a question or comment. Brendan?
Yeah, I generally agree with Penny. I think it's important that we have some standards and governors as we think about, entry into the schools. It's obviously a really important time, and it's good that there is this process, I think, to, get input from the family, obviously putting a kid forward who they think is ready for school, but to have some assessment and standards and a determination by the schools, I think makes a lot of sense. I also, support that addition, Penny, to the extent that we don't already have that, which I have a feeling we may already have something like that, but if there's a way to sort of raise the bar, and deal with, issues where there's a dispute, then we should have a mechanism to be able to make that happen.
Just to share, the reason the principal is the primary in this, and happy to have another layer, what have you, but throughout the policy where it's grade placements and folks are moving in, it is the principal is the arbiter of what grade is this child going to be in, et cetera. So the policy does purposefully put those educational decisions in the hands of the principal, who's closest to the work and the teachers in the classrooms and et cetera. So that's why the principal was primary on that.
Were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would just say, to respond to Penny, I mean, I think that as a board, we have supported the administration a lot in classroom coaches, allowing them to determine the amount of sections within the school and keeping within those guidelines. And on the lower end of those guidelines, we haven't, as I know, as if we reviewed it, we haven't gone over in any section above the recommended classroom size. And we've given the teachers more support over the last 18 months than prior. I would also say, as you look at this, there's no language that when you talk about the gap of ages that goes the other side. Like to Mr. Campbell's point, we're looking at parents really in a 90-day window, and we're not talking to parents who are holding their kids back and creating this very large gap on the other side and sending much older children into our youngest classrooms. And so I think it's just, when you look at how each parent will read these guidelines, I agree with Mr. Campbell that I would rather side on the parent side, that they understand their child, that they've come and gone through the process, and I agree to holding the assessments. Like, I had a child on the bubble, I called our principal, I had a discussion, I brought my daughter in, we did that, and it was a very collaborative and positive experience with the principal, and I went with the principal's recommendation. And now, years later, I've still worked with the principal on that recommendation to, because she is on the younger side. And I think that I would, again, say that the parents know the child, they're invested in the 13-year journey of their child more than anyone. And I would side with the parents in this. And so I would propose just simply striking the last sentence and keeping the assessment, the conversation, and the parents working collaboratively with the administration.
Well, another thing, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, another thing I would add, well, you mentioned one of them, but the gap is obviously the whole, we're not compelling kids to start earlier, but also when you think about sort of disruptive, and, we create sort of these, hypothetical scenarios of whether it's a child is socially or sort of emotionally developed enough, but there are several variables that determine a child's social involvement and integration into a classroom, right? The socioeconomic status of the family. It could be the family structure, the family dynamics, the birth order of the child. I mean, there's several variables that we're not accounting for that weigh, I would argue, way more than whether they're born September 1st or August 31st, right? And so, and then furthermore, when we say, okay, a compelling reason, well, that's a pretty subjective standard, right? And I couldn't imagine, Brian, knowing you, that you would sort of veto one of your principles in the first place. So I appreciate sort of the extra step in due process. In reality, for parents, it doesn't bring much comfort or inspire much sort of like confidence, no offense, but like, assuming you hired these people because you trust their opinion, I would assume you would back them as well, right? Which would only make sense and would be appropriate for you to do. And so again, I think that, making them sort of the final arbiter, and again, no one wants a disruptive classroom, but again, it's not whether the child born September 2nd is more disruptive than the one born August 31st. There are other variables. And I would also question, to your point, Penny, maybe we could get the data and say, okay, well, how many children fall into this category, and how many of those would be labeled as disruptive? I mean, because the counter argument may not be there, may not be supported by the data, at least in our observation, because the trend, especially in a community like New Canaan, is to hold your child back, right?
Penny?
So I guess I would like to hear from the administration on what the experience has been this year. And I use the term disruptive, but I also think that there could be differences related to just the age of the child and whether or not they can learn and do certain things, regardless of disruption or not. I mean, I know that like the brain develops at different levels, and some people can learn math concepts at 1 year, and other children it takes another year. So I would like to hear from the administration on why you feel in the experience in the classroom brought you to change the policy here.
So we do have data. I'm always careful about talking about this kind of data because it's identifiable, because you're talking about a small group of children that were held back. So the data I will...
Put forward or help out?
that were put forward, excuse me. So you have a small percentage of kids that were put forward. So you always have to be careful when you talk about that data. But I do know that, they do have numeracy assessments. They do have literacy assessments that they've done on the children. They do have their kindergarten assessments that we do for the state of Connecticut that we do on all kindergartners and their entry level into kindergarten. I would say that when you start to get past a certain month, you do notice a big difference. So when you start to get into more of the later part of the year, there is a big difference between somebody that might have been born in September versus somebody that might have been born in December. So there is that big gap that occurs. And so you're always trying to make sure that you can developmentally help that child to close that gap. And so, and once again, this is not all kids. All kids are different. Every child is different. Some children come in perfectly fine, wouldn't be able to look in the class, wouldn't be able to tell any of the age differences. And it could be an older child who is in the grade level that might be acting out. I mean, kindergarten is a very challenging age group. I think what's most important is if you are going to take that last sentence out, I do think it's really important that you have something to the effect of, afterward, the principal will make a recommendation to the parent about the child's placement. I think it needs to go on record that a principal is saying, I don't think your child's ready for kindergarten based on the observations, based on the preschool information that we've gathered, based on the conversation that we've had. I just would hate not to have that on the record, that that principal had that conversation with that parent and had that and really made that recommendation to them. Because unfortunately, sometimes those things come back and they say, well, had I known, I wouldn't have started kindergarten, I would have held my child out a year, can they be retained now? We've had questions of, can kids be retained in second grade? Can kids be retained in fourth grade? I don't want them to go off to SACs. They're socially and emotionally not ready to go off to SACs. Can you hold them back now? And so those are the questions that usually we don't hold them back. You know, it goes based on their years of experience in school, and another year of fourth grade, another year of second grade isn't going to be in the best interest of the child, to have all the curriculum repeated for them, to lose the friends that they've gained over those years in school. So I do think that it's important to make sure when we're having these conversations with parents that they also understand the impact that happens in the K-12 experience. Also that impact of what age their children will graduate from high school, because being a former elementary principal, those conversations do come in, and sometimes it's in fourth grade when they're like, I wish I had known. I wouldn't have put my child into kindergarten. I would have held them out for that year. They've always seemed to be 6 months behind in their writing, in their reading, in their math, in their social development. So if we are going to, if the board is going to make a decision to remove that sentence, I do think you want to have some type of recommendation that goes on file. I do think you're right, Lara. I do think most of the conversations are collaborative. Most of the people are going to say, I agree with you. I hear what you're saying. I've talked with my preschool. They're saying the same thing. It's a real collaborative conversation that's going to happen. But then there are going to be some that I just want to make sure that the school has said, we're not recommending the child come to kindergarten at this time. And then if it does become an override by, an appeal or however you want to word it, at least it's been on record that the school personnel have said, we really strongly recommend that they don't start kindergarten.
Julie?
I just also wanted to say another one of the reasons is because, as a parent, there's nobody that cares more about the child than the parent. And we're certainly not trying to take away any parental authority or purview. But as a parent of a child in kindergarten, a lot of times you come in and, you don't know. It could be your first child. It could be your second child, but your first child's, in first or second grade. You don't have the experience or any idea to know what your child is going to be like in third, fourth, or fifth, or sixth grade, or what the age gap, might happen at that point. And so I think this is just one of those times when, you get two very interested groups. You have your parents who have a certain amount of knowledge, and you have the administration who've seen, thousands and thousands of kids go through these schools and have seen the problems that come up, not only in kindergarten, but in second, third, fourth, or fifth grade. I've had friends who, to get their child to stay back, have to pull them out and send them to private school, which is a huge financial change. But it is true, you don't want to hold your child back within the same school district. You sort of have to do a switch of schools in order to do that. So I just think this is one where everybody has the best interest of the kids at heart. The administration, the teachers have a lot of experience in this that parents don't have in looking at the routes that various students take.
Julie?
So I'm on the governance committee, and I sat through this. And I do see both sides here. I think both sides have good points. I've had a few conversations over the past 2 or 3 days, which is making me rethink some of this. A few of those things are, let me just start by saying that my son has a September 15th birthday, and I almost sent him what would be considered a year early. But I didn't decide until the week before preschool started, or pre-K started, that I was going to send him to pre-K and wait another year before I sent him. I'm very happy with that decision. I've spoke to a mom who has a daughter who's turning 5 in July, and she's apoplectic. She's like, my child's ready to go. She's ready to go, and she's going to be bored to tears in another year of preschool.
Wait, if she's born in July, she would go.
Right.
I'm sorry, not July. September.
Oh, okay.
And I spoke to I'll come back to the July thing. It's actually March, but I spoke to a mom who now has a second grader who has an October birthday, and she said her child is thriving, and if she had held her child back, she thinks that she would have been bored to tears. And in speaking to the mom with the child with a September birthday, she said that at her preschool now, there's talk of birthdays in March that want to hold. So I think no matter what we do, I think there's going to be a huge gap. I think it's either going to be this way or that way, but I think there's going to be a big gap. That being said, I think we can rework this last sentence, and I love Jill's suggestion where it would go on record. And maybe something like, afterward the principal, well, forget that line, but
I think you could
Along
rework
with
that line.
what's that?
I think that's the line you could rework, right? Just
Yeah,
keep it that
well,
way, so
I
afterward, the
was also gonna
principal will make a recommendation.
I was also
Yeah,
going
make
to
a
suggest maybe like a pre-K or a preschool recommendation should be included as well. That way, if the preschool's like, whoa, no, okay,
Well, we already get a preschool form.
that's true.
So the preschools fill out a form and submit them. So sometimes we don't have those preschool forms, though, until the children are, in February or March, getting ready to come to spring orientation.
Okay.
So they don't have to actually submit the preschool form when they register the child.
Okay.
They send it off to the preschools. Oftentimes, it's after January when the preschools are completing the forms, and then they just kind of trickle in during that time period. But I think, once again, you do have in here that there should be those compelling reasons
Right.
as to why they want to have their child start. So the child who is thriving, who's doing really well in preschool, would have that conversation with their principal, and the recommendation might be that there's a compelling reason to have that child start. Somebody else who might not have that compelling reason, the principal might say, well, I would personally recommend that your child stay back one more year and do preschool for one more year.
Well, I love,
Problem is, compelling reason is very subjective, right? And sort of,
But once again, it's the parent who would bring that compelling reason forward, and you would have to trust what the parent's saying. Because once again, it's hard to
Well, that's
sit
exactly-
and- it's
yeah.
hard to evaluate, a
based on one.
4-year-old.
Yeah. Well,
And,
that's
you know,
exactly my point. I think exactly what we're saying, Joe, I think is, you make that recommendation. I think that's a service to the parent. That assessment is a service, and it's a data point to the parent. But ultimately, they should be the final arbiters of what's best for their child. That's the only point I was making.
so I do, just to end my thought here, no, it's okay. I think if we change the last sentence to what Jill said, but leave it with the parents make the final decision, but the principal would have it noted on record, I think that's very fair.
If I can make one suggestion, well, first, thank you for it's a great conversation. The suggestion I have would simply be, as a policy, it doesn't have to be seconded tonight, right? So we could, if it's helpful for you, we would be happy to go back to the data and figure out a way to make it confidential and anonymous enough to share some of that information prior to making a final decision. I know we've got, the numbers are right in my head, I think it's 3 students over at West, maybe 6 over at South, and maybe 25 over at East. So we'll take a look at those data points and figure out a way to share it with the board and get some more specific information from the principals as well, just so you have all of the information and data that could be helpful in making this decision.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, a good move.
I think that would be great.
One thing, so the current policy has the area of discretion being from September 2nd, it looks like, to the end of the year, which was a 4-month period in which we were saying that's where the conversation happens to say, between the principal and the parent on whether or not it makes sense, and then the principal has a recommendation, and it lies with the parent. I'm wondering if there's an intermediate between that and there's a single date cutoff, maybe a shorter range of that, instead of a 4-month period, a 2-month period, or something like that, that acknowledges that it's not a single birth date, that's, a latest, a switch is flipped, and then a kid's ready, a kid's not ready, but that there's a range in which there's a little bit of give and take depending on the child, but just in acknowledgement of the fact that there have been, some kids that have struggled or had some challenges, that maybe we tighten it up, and not have it be a
Well,
4-month.
the legislation does require that waiver from September 2nd till December 31st, because that was the age of eligibility prior. I will share, after our meeting last time, one of our principals received a letter from a parent the next day or so, saying that their child was born September 3rd, 4th, wherever it was, and they're considering enrolling the child. And I spoke with the principal, and we said, yeah, that's one that would most likely, there's a compelling reason there, and meet with them and talk with them, and if it all works out, then the child will come, But if it was December 4th, it might be a different conversation depending upon readiness for the child. So that's at least was the thinking going in. But we can get the data, and we can look at it that way, look at September, October, November, and look at the children and see, it's academic, but it is the behavioral piece, and it's the community piece. And, we know, having raised children, right, the different developmental stages, especially at those early ages. And when we're talking about 6 months or 8 months, it can be a significant difference for a child. So let's get some of the information, the data for you, and we'll at least, make as informed a decision as we can.
Julie?
I think that would be great, Dr. Lutzi. I just want to say again, my big concern, it was a conversation I had about an hour ago, hearing that there are preschool parents with a kid with a March birth date that are now considering holding. That was eye-opening for me to hear.
Sure. Penny?
So I think there are other states that have a September 1st cutoff.
Sure.
Does New York one?
Yep.
So maybe you could reach out to districts that have similar, in New York, that have.
They don't have a waiver.
They don't have a waiver, so it's not comparable. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess.
We'll look to see if there are other states with September 1 that do, but New York, I don't think New Jersey does either. I think they're September 1.
So then I would actually still be interested from a district, like, Rye or something, where you very similar to New Canaan, lots of high-performing children. And you get a child with a September 15th, there's no waiver. So what has happened in that district so that those children are not feeling like, they're just wasting a year when they could have been in school? I mean, I'm sure something's developed. I mean.
Sure, we'll find out. We'll talk to a few of our colleagues. Yep.
Okay, so we'll put a pin in this one, and we'll get some data. We'll have another discussion about it. But I'm open to amending that last sentence. I think that it's important that the parents not only have the ability to collaborate, but also feel like they are empowered. And I really don't think that it would generate too much of a problem. So moving on from that one.
What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry, Brendan, do you have another comment? Good, okay. Okay, so next, policy update was moved to approve as a second reading the revisions to the Board of Education Policy 5322, Open Campus, New Canaan High School, is first moved and seconded by Ms. Rashin and Mr. Campbell, respectively. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes, thank you.
And I just simply want to say to any high schooler watching, we're not changing the open campus policy, because there were a few worried emails that I received from some of our students worried that we were doing something differently with open campus, so you're safe.
Thanks for the clarification.
Very important.
Next, move to approve as a second reading the revisions to the Board of Education Policy 6500, High School Graduation Standards, as first moved and seconded by Mr. Campbell and Mr. Wexler, respectively. Comments, discussion? Okay, all in favor? That passes, thank you. And then lastly, move to approve as a second reading the revisions to the Board of Education Policy 6600 homework as first moved and seconded by Ms. Rashin and Mr. Campbell respectively. Any comments or discussion? Great, all in favor? Excellent, passes, thank you. And then moving on to comments from the public. Would anybody like to approach the board? Okay. And then announcements and future business.
That's great. Just a couple of quick things. First, this is generally a meeting that we consider canceling. I'm glad that we didn't. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the conversation. Today I met with Chief DeFederico and our deputy chief as well, Andrew, and we talked about the SROs at the elementary schools and the implementation of that program, and they're on track, and things are going well with that, so they're excited to get up and running in January with coverage across the schools and have a plan. And Mike O'Sullivan couldn't make it, but we heard from him a couple of weeks ago with the CAB update and the division, so to speak, that he's running. So met with them, went through the MOU and some other conversation, including e-bikes in town and a few other things that we'll be talking about. But it was a great conversation. If you're unaware, our new Canaan High School football Rams will beat Darien for our third consecutive state championship. It was an excellent game. The kids played incredibly well, so well coached by Lou and Chris and everybody involved. Lots to be proud of there. And Mr. Egan shared with me that it's our third state championship this season. So out of 7 possible titles, we earned 3. Our kids earned 3. And it was girls soccer, cross country, and football. So 3 out of 7, pretty amazing. On Thursday, just a quick reminder for the board, we have our alumni roundtable at 8 o'clock in the College and Career Center, if you can make it. As we do annually, we invite back students that now having finished their first semester at school. And Sue Carroll does a fabulous job getting a great group of kids together to just talk about their experiences, talk about what the transition was like. And it's always a wonderful conversation. And after they meet with us, they come here into the Wagner Room, and they'll have the senior class, and a larger group will meet with the entire senior class and talk to them about the transition and what happens. And then we started a few years ago having them meet with the junior class, too. So the seniors will leave, the juniors will come in. And the message to the juniors always is, relax, it'll work out. You'll be all right. And other than that, just to wish everybody a wonderful holiday, and happy holidays to all. And congratulations to all on a successful start to, or end to 2024, and as we get into 2025, hard to believe. Happy
Excellent.
holidays and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Then the next meeting's January 6th, and that'll be the superintendent's budget presentation.
That's right.
And we are going to now go down the hall, relocate to room 231 to get a PA system demonstration as a brief presentation, and then we'll adjourn.
Correct. It's a continuation from our workshop. So we will adjourn to room 231 for a few minutes. I want to just going to show a little demonstration of the PA system, security system, and camera and classroom enhancement system as we've been discussing. And we'll keep it to 10 minutes or less. All right.